Showing off, don't wanna have to wait tonight. Wait tonight. Better off, I'm gonna find a way tonight. Wait tonight. To me, I wanna hear your thoughts. To me, we'll make tomorrow. Showing off, don't wanna have to wait tonight. Wait tonight. Better off, I'm gonna find a way tonight. Wait tonight. To me, I wanna hear your thoughts. To me, we'll make tomorrow.
All right, here we are once again. I really need to get my captions set up in this screen as well, but too late to do that tonight. I decided to expand my reading streams because I love reading. Got away from it for a lot of years because of life, and now that I'm back into it and I've been reading twice a week, I'm hungry for more. So hey, if I say I'm gonna start at 9 o'clock, I want to be as close to that as possible. Welcome in, Super Nambro. Um, so yeah, I was just saying I want to read more. So if I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna stream it. So my eventual goal is to maybe, possibly, um, do a reading stream every day. So right now I'm already streaming 9 streams a week. If I start doing this on Tuesdays, that'll make it 10. I'll add days as I feel like I can, and eventually start doing a reading stream and a gaming stream every day. So I'll expand the Star Wars reading as well as this stuff. But I was just looking at my library of books like this. I'm going to guess I have, in electronic format, 10,000 volumes of stuff that I could be reading on this stream. So I don't think I'll ever run out in my lifetime. So anyway, we're back in Forbidden History. We're going to read 2 more. Yeah, I'm a little bit of a hoarder, but I've transitioned it into electronic hoarding. instead of physical hoarding. So um, I don't feel so bad about it. Uh, but yeah, we're going to read two more articles on advanced technology and advanced ancient technology. So this one is Atlantean technology, how advanced? What does the evidence really show? And that is by Frank Joseph. So yeah, stick around. There's always something interesting in these articles, even if it's just one little tidbit. Edgar Casey said that the inhabitants of Atlantis operated aircraft and submarines and were in possession of a fabulous technology superior to that achieved in the 20th century. The question of so advanced a technology in ancient times is the most difficult argument for many investigators to accept, especially Casey's descriptions of achievements beyond anything known today. He said the Atlanteans were adept at photographing from a distance and reading inscriptions through walls even at distances. The Atlantean electrical knife, oh, this is actually a quote, sorry. Quote, electrical knife was in such a shape with the use of the metals as to be used as the means for bloodless surgery, as would be termed today by the very staying forces used, which formed coagulating forces in bodies where larger arteries or veins were to be entered or cut. End quote. Refugees from Atlantis supposedly brought to Egypt. Oh, are we in an ad already? Damn. I hate it that I need to figure out how to end ads in the reading stream. I need to just shut them off because what a pain. So I'm just going to kind of pause. That's why I have it up on my screen so I can see. Okay, so back to it. Refugees from Atlantis supposedly brought to Egypt, quote, electron music, where color, vibration, and activities make for toning. Wow, it's a rough sentence. Sorry. Make for toning same with the emotions of individuals or people that may make for their temperaments being changed. That's a hard sentence. This is supposed to be a quote. Let me start that over again. Electron music where color, vibration, and activities make for toning, same with the emotions of individuals or peoples that may make for their temperaments being changed, and same may be applied by the entity in those associations with what may be called the temperaments of individuals, where they are possessed, as it were, by the influences from without, and those that are ill from diseases that have become of a nature or vibratory influence within the body as to set themselves as a vibration in the body. End quote. That has got to be from like a notebook or something where he wasn't trying to make coherent sentences, because holy cow, that's rough. Um, all right, on with it. Casey told of, quote, a death ray that brought from the bowels of the earth itself, when turned into the sources of supply, those destructions to portions of the land, end quote. I think they have some of those installed at American colleges, but they're tuned backwards. Bad vibrations. They probably do, yeah. Let's see. This death ray may be today's laser because Casey said in 1933 it, quote, will be found in the next 25 years, end quote. He spoke of electrical appliances when, quote, this is another quote, electrical appliances, when these were used by those people to make for beautiful buildings without but temples of sin within. Oh, beautiful buildings without, but temples of sin within. Okay. End quote. The Atlanteans were skilled in, quote, the application of the electrical forces and influences, especially in the association and the activities of same upon metals, not only as to their location, but as to the manner of the activity of same as related to the refining of some and the discovery of others, and the use of the various forms or transportation of same, or transportation of same to and through those influences in the experience. End quote. I think I'm starting to get a kind of a sense of his cadence, because that sentence was a little easier. I've never read Casey, and it's on my list, but it's a long, long list. At the time Casey said that the Atlanteans used electrical current for the working of metals, there was no evidence that the ancients knew anything about electricity, let alone how it might be applied to metallurgy. Then in 1938, Dr. Wilhelm Koenig, a German archaeologist, was inventorying artifacts at the Iraq State Museum in Baghdad when he noticed what seemed to be the impossible resemblance of a collection of 2,000-year-old clay jars to a series of dry cell storage batteries. The Baghdad batteries, I'm sure you've all heard of them by now. His curiosity had been aroused by the peculiar internal details of the jars, each of which enclosed a copper cylinder capped at the bottom by a disc, also of copper, and sealed with asphalt. A few years later, Dr. Koenig's suspicion was put to the test. Willard Gray, a technician at the General Electric High Voltage Laboratory in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, finished an exact reproduction of the Baghdad jars. He found that an iron rod inserted into the copper tube and filled with citric acid generated 1.5 to 2.75 volts of electricity, enough to electroplate an object with gold. Gray's experiment demonstrated that practical electricity could have been applied to metalworking by ancient craftsmen after all. Ancient acid batteries, yeah, exactly. Lemon juice. Iron, copper, and lemon juice, and you got a battery. It's just amazing. Um, Doubtless the Baghdad battery, as it has since become known, was not the first of its kind. It was a device that represented an unknown technology preceding it by perhaps thousands of years and might have included far more spectacular feats of electrical engineering long since lost. According to Casey, the Atlanteans did not confine their application of electricity to metallurgy. They had, quote, the use of the sound waves were the manners in which lights were used as a means of communication, end quote. Another quote, elevators and the connecting tubes that were used by compressed air and steam, end quote, operated in Atlantean buildings. Atlantean technology soared into... actually, I want to pause right there. If you don't know who was it Edgar Casey? Edward Casey. Anyway, Edgar Casey. If you don't know who he was, I don't know where he was from originally, but he lived in the U.S., and he was a farmer, as I recall, but he was also a kind of a psychic. He would go into these trances, and I don't remember if he was saying the things while he was in the trance or if he just wrote it all down when he came back. But this where all this stuff about Atlantis came from. And it was back in the 1930s. So right towards the end, I think, of H.P. Blavatsky's life, and also around about the time Aleister Crowley was dying of heroin addiction. So it was a lot of stuff going on back in that time. One time I spoke fluent German in my sleep, confirmed by like 20 witnesses on a mission trip as a kid. Oh, okay, okay. There's so much that we don't know. Um, that that's one of the reasons I get into this kind of stuff because you know I just I love to hear about it, especially when you start putting things together. Um, well, like they were saying, he's talking about this in the 30s, and then the Baghdad batteries were found. What was the year that that they were found? 1938. He's talking about it in 33, and they were discovered in 38 and confirmed years later. Okay, where were we? Atlantean technology soared into aeronautics. Airships of elephant hides were, quote, made into the containers for the gases that were used as both lifting and for the impelling of the crafts about the various portions of the continent, and were abroad, and even abroad, they could not only pass through that called air or that heavier, but through that of water, end quote. So he's talking. Um, I wonder how many of these batteries one would need to chain together to do anything useful. Well, they were electroplating stuff with just one, so I don't know. Um, it said 1.5 to 2.75, so think of it as double A batteries are like what 1.75. Um, so yeah, apparently it doesn't take all that much electricity to electroplate. I didn't know with gold anyway. Yeah, they're a little bit more than that because I mean you're talking a jar, a a couple gallons in size, as I recall. It's been a long time since I've even seen pictures of them, but yeah, um, they're fairly big. But if you connected those together in a series or in what's the other one called? You can either do it in series or I can't think of the word. Anyway, you can step up the voltage one way, or you can just increase the power. Parallel, yes. Thank you. One way you can step up the power, and the other you just add capacity. But yeah, I mean they could have done all kinds of things, and yeah, that's got my mind just racing. Let's move on with the with the article. Um, Okay. Manned flight is particularly emblematic of our times, and we find such references to ancient aeronautics incredible. Yet serious researchers believe Peruvian balloonists may have surveyed the famous Nazca lines 2,000 or more years ago from aerial perspectives. Despite reluctance to take Casey at his word, equivocal yet tantalizing evidence does exist to at least suggest that manned flight may indeed have occurred in the ancient world. I've never heard of them looking at the Nazca lines from balloons. That's interesting. Okay, cool. Enjoy your fajitas. I'm going to keep on reading here. The earliest substantiated journeys aloft took place in the 5th century BCE, even before Plato was born, when the Greek scientist Ar- Archytas of Tarentum invented a leather kite large enough to carry a young boy. It was actually used by Greek armies in the earliest known example of aerial reconnaissance. More amazing was the discovery made in the Upper Nile Valley near the close of the 19th century, the story is best told by the famous author and explorer David Hatcher Childress. Quote, in 1898, a model was found in an Egyptian tomb near Saqqara. It was labeled a bird and catalogued Object 6347 at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Then in 1969, Dr. Khalil Massia was startled to see that the bird not only had straight wings but also an upright tail fin. To Dr. Massia, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, the object appeared to be that of a model airplane. It is made of wood, weighs 39.12 grams, and remains in good condition. Quote, the wingspan is 18 centimeters, the aircraft's nose is 3.2 centimeters long, and the overall length is 18 centimeters. The extremities of the aircraft and the wing tips are aerodynamically shaped. Apart from a symbolic eye and two short lines under the wings, it has no decorations, nor has it any landing legs. Experts have tested the model and found it is airworthy. End quote. In all 14 similar flying in sorry, let me start over. In all, 14 similar flying models have been recovered from ancient digs in Egypt. Interestingly, the Saqqara example came from an archaeological zone identified with the earliest dynastic periods, at the very beginning of pharaonic civilizations, which suggests that the aircraft was not a later development but belonged instead to the first years of civilization in the Nile Valley. The Egyptians' anomalous artifacts may indeed have been flying models of the real thing operated by their Atlantean forefathers. The Cairo Museum's wooden model of a working glider implies the ancient Egyptians at least understood the fundamental principles of heavier-than-air man-made flight. Perhaps such knowledge was the only legacy left from a former time, when those principles were applied more seriously. The quote from Childress is excerpted from his book Vimana Aircraft of Ancient India and Atlantis. I used to have that book. I can't find it. I'm trying to get a hold of it again in an electronic format. Interesting book. I would definitely read that one on this stream. Co-authored by Ivan Sanderson. The most complete examination of the subject. In it, he was able to assemble surprising evidence from the earliest Hindu traditions of aircraft supposedly flown in ancient times, then known as Vimanas. They appear in the famous Ramayana and Mahabharata, and the less well-known but earliest of the Egyptian epics, the Drona Parva. I'm going to have to find those. I may have them. I actually may have them. Because I'm sure if they're available in English, they would be part of the Sacred Books of the East series, which is 50 books long and includes some really obscure Indian stuff. And I'm pretty sure I have that whole set. Aircraft were discussed in surprisingly technical detail throughout several manuscripts of ancient India. The Vimanika Shastra, Manusa, and Samarangana Sutradhara, all classic sources, additionally describe aerial cars that were allegedly operating from deeply prehistoric times. Each of these epics deals with a former age, hinting at the last bellicose, cataclysmic years of Atlantis. Childress's collection of impressive source material dating back to the dawn of Hindu literature heavily underscores Casey's description of flying devices in Atlantis. It is important to understand, however, that these Vimanas had virtually nothing in common with modern aviation because their motive power was utterly unlike combustion or jet engines. They also had little to do with aeronautics as we have come to understand it. They were supposed to be run by engines that used mercury. I don't remember how. That's another reason I want to reread the book. Apparently, the Atlanteans operated two types of flying vehicles: gas-filled dirigible-like craft and heavier-than-air vimanas directed from a central power source on the ground. While the latter represented an aeronautical technology beyond any known aircraft, the balloons Casey describes featured a detail that suggests their authenticity. He said their skin was made of elephant hides. They probably would have been too heavy to serve as envelopes for the containment of any lighter than air gas, but lighter, expandable, and non-leaking elephant bladders might have worked. In any case, Casey says that the Atlanteans used the animals which were native to their kingdom for a variety of purposes. The Critias also mentions that elephants abounded on the island of Atlantis. Skeptics long faulted Plato for including this out-of-place pachyderm until the 1960s, when oceanographers dredging the sea bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, some 200 miles west of the Portuguese coast, unexpectedly hauled up hundreds of elephant bones at several different locations. The scientists concluded that the animals had anciently wandered across a now submerged land bridge extending from the Atlantic shores of North Africa into formerly dry land long since sunk beneath the sea. Their discovery gave special credence not only to Plato, but to Casey as well. No less surprising are the submarines known to the early 5th century early 5th century BCE Greek historian Herodotus, and the 1st century CE Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder. Even Aristotle wrote about submarines. His most famous pupil, Alexander the Great, was said to have been on board a glass-covered undersea vessel during an extended shakedown cruise beneath the eastern Mediterranean Sea around 320 BCE. Okay, moving. Let's see, here we are. While these submersibles may have gone back 23 centuries or so, Atlantis had already vanished about 1,000 years earlier. Even so, if such inventions took place in classical times, they might just as well have operated during the Bronze Age, which was not much different technologically. Ancient aeronautics paled in comparison to even greater technological achievements, as Atlantean scientists succeeded, quote, in the breaking up of the atomic forces to produce impelling force to those means and modes of transportation or of travel, or of lifting large weights, or of changing the faces or forces of nature itself, end quote, said Edgar Casey. So he's talking about atomic bombs or atomic energy. The same life reading explains that explosives were invented by the Atlanteans. 7 years earlier, he mentioned what he called the Atlantean period. This is another quote: the Atlantean period when those first of the explosives were made, end quote. Ignatius Donnelly, the father of modern Atlantology, wrote even earlier that explosives were developed in Atlantis. Casey explained that the Atlanteans were able to create such an advanced society because their civilization developed over a more or less continuous history until the final catastrophe. Their cultural evolution had been graced with many centuries of growth in which to develop and perfect the scientific arts. The basis of this ancient technology was an understanding and application of crystal power. Through it, the motive forces of nature were somehow directed to serve human needs. Transportation on, above, and under the sea became possible, and long-distance communication bound together the world of Atlantis. We find such a high level of material progress set in prehistoric times incomprehensible and beyond belief, yet many better-known civilizations achieved technological breakthroughs that were forgotten when their societies fell, only to be rediscovered sometimes thousands of years later. In Middle America, for example, Mayan accomplishments in celestial mechanics were not matched until the last century. Incan agricultural techniques, abandoned with the Spanish conquest, yielded 3 times more produce than farming methods employed in Peru today. At the same time Plato was writing about Atlantis, his fellow Greeks were sailing the Alexandris. More than 400 feet long, she was a colossal ship, the likes of which would not be seen again for another 2,000 years. A pregnancy test in use among 18th dynasty Egyptians was not rediscovered until the 1920s. As for Egypt, our modern world's top engineers lack the know-how capable of reproducing the Great Pyramid in all its details. Certainly far more was lost with the fall of ancient civilization than has yet been found. Moreover, our times do not have a monopoly on human beings of great genius and inventiveness. That they were able to create complex technologies in other times and societies long since forgotten should not overtax our credulity. And if one of those lost epochs belonged to a place known as Atlantis, we have it on the authority of Western civilization's most influential philosopher and the foremost psychic our century has yet produced, which would be Casey. However, they may disagree in their interpretations of the lost civilization. Both metaphysical and worldwide mythological sources are almost unanimous in describing a central role for the sophisticated technology of Atlantis in its ultimate destruction. Casey said that the Atlanteans grew intoxicated with the material wonders made possible through quartz crystal technology. The riches and luxuries it generated inspired them with an insatiable desire for abundance. They turned the beam of their powerful crystals into the very bowels of the planet, excavating for even greater mineral wealth. Prodigious amounts of high-grade copper, which fueled the bronze weapons industries of the pre-classical world, and gold enough to sheet the walls of their city, poured forth from Earth's violated cornucopia. The copper mining operations of prehistoric Michigan still bear the scars of Atlantean technology. For example, some unknown device enabled the ancient miners of the Upper Peninsula to sink pits vertically through 60 feet of solid rock. Another piece of lost instrumentation directed them to all the richest veins of copper hidden under the hillsides of Isle Royale and the Kewaunee Peninsula. These and similar achievements of the late 4th millennia BCE, which allowed the prehistoric miners to remove a minimum of 500 million pounds of raw copper, are no speculation. They have been known to archaeologists for more than a century. Perhaps in overreaching themselves through their mining operations, the Atlanteans excavated too deeply into the already seismically unstable mid-Atlantic ridge on which their capital perched. They were blind to the geologic consequences of their ecological selfishness and regarded our living planet as an inexhaustible fount of mineral wealth. Parallels with our times are uncomfortably close. A notice just came up for Super Nambro for Twitter about his fajitas. Uh, the Atlanteans reveled in an orgy of self-indulgent materialism, but at some indefinable point, long-suffering nature rebelled. The threshold of her forbearance had been crossed, and she chastised her sinful children with a terrible punishment. Her fires of hell opened to engulf opulent Atlantis in a volcanic event so cataclysmic that it destroyed the entire island. The crumbling, incinerated city with its screaming inhabitants was dragged to the bottom of the sea and into myth. The great terrible crystal, the source of the Atlanteans' unexampled prosperity had become the instrument of their doom. Oh, and that was the end of the article. So, wow, there was some interesting stuff there. Um, the Vimana, I mean, they covered a lot. The Vimana aircraft, the Baghdad batteries, um, all kinds of Atlantis stuff. Um, yeah, that was pretty good. And it was well written. It was a little bit rough in some of the Casey um, quotes because of how they were written, but um, yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to jump right into the next one. Um, and it's a little bit shorter. And it is Article 29, Archaeology and the Law of Gravity. Orthodox theory of ancient capability tends to cave in under its own weight, by Will Hart. The massive earth mover makes the average street pickup look like a Tonka truck. Rated at about 350 tons, it is restricted to mining operations as the federal highway load limit is 40 tons, and the truck weighs more than that without a load. I was watching it being put through its paces in the local open pit copper mine in Bisbee, Arizona. A bone-jarring flash suddenly struck me that snapped into place things that I had long been trying to get a perspective on. The earth mover is the heaviest truck that we have in modern civilization and can haul the heaviest loads we find littering the landscapes in Egypt, Bolivia, and Peru. At one point in my life, as I was learning the ropes... Oh, there goes our ad again. I'll wait it out. Good chance to sip on some water. Okay. Is there only one? Please only be one. There we go. The earth mover is the heaviest truck that we have in modern civilization, and it can haul the heaviest loads we find littering the landscapes in Egypt, Bolivia, and Peru. At one point in my life, as I was learning the ropes of the literary world, I worked on a cement construction crew in a logging town, where I came to know about handling heavy loads and what a front-end loader could lift and a double flatbed logging truck could haul. During the course of my 30 years of investigations into the mysteries of ancient civilizations, I have often been puzzled by the way people react to cyclopean blocks of stone being moved long distances or hoisted up into the air. These reactions were either a blank look or a shrug that said, "Okay, what's the big deal?" This response frustrated me and made me feel as if I was not communicating adequately the scope and difficulty of the problem. But I have since realized that the reason most people do not grasp the magnitude of the problem and what the real enigmas of our planet are has to do with simple, direct experience. 150 years ago, most people lived on farms in rural areas and were commonly faced with having to haul loads of hay, logs, or whatever. They knew what it took to bale a ton of hay and lift a 300-pound log or chunk of rock. But today, machines handle all of these heavy lifting and moving jobs, and we have lost our perspective. I recently had a conversation with a friend about these issues wherein I was trying to explain why the Egyptians could not have built the Great Pyramid with primitive tools and techniques. He was skeptical until he recalled an event that quickly shifted his attitude. I was telling him that I would be willing to concede that the builders could handle the millions of 2.5-ton blocks if he would deal with the problem of the 70-ton megaliths over the king's chamber. The light went on in his head. He suddenly became animated as he told me how he and a group of friends were faced with moving a heavy pool table. They positioned themselves about it, shoulder to shoulder, and gave the old heave-ho. It came as a great surprise when the pool table remained rooted to the floor. They had not been able to lift it even 1 inch. My point sank in. You cannot use manpower to lift a 70-ton block of granite up and out of a quarry and onto a sledge. The task increases exponentially when you consider how 100-ton blocks were hoisted up and positioned more than 20 feet off the ground in the Sphinx Temple. This is an engineering and physics problem that cannot be overcome by numbers, which is how Egyptologists try to solve it. Granite is very dense, and a 20-foot-long block can weigh 70 tons. How many men can physically fit around it to attempt a lift? Maybe 50, which is not even enough power to hoist 10 tons. So, real quick, I was going to show, there are two pictures here. One's of a train, 1950s vintage 200-ton steam locomotive. The other is gigantic blocks in the Khafre Pyramid, weigh more than 70 tons each, and are many stories above ground. So this is a view of some of those blocks. You can see the ones that create this is difficult to do backwards. This triangle here, those are the 70-ton blocks they're talking about. And that train, you wouldn't think so, but it weighs 200 tons. All right, so moving on. This is an intractable problem. As long as Egyptologists insist that men lifted up the Cyclopean blocks of stone with nothing but brute force and ropes, this problem will need to be overcome. The rest of the construction formula of the Egyptologists is moot until the primary obstacle is dealt with. If they cannot or will not prove that it was accomplished as they claim, then it is time to go beyond challenging the rest of their baseless theories. We need to discard the whole orthodox house of cards and walk away from the so-called debate. Returning to the 350-ton Cyclopean monsters, our highest-rated commercial cranes are near their limit with this load. If anyone thinks that men, ropes, and sledges lifted and hauled loads that our heaviest equipment can barely handle, I will argue that this belief is a sign of technological illiteracy. Recently, I was watching a documentary about a bridge that collapsed while a train was traveling over it. I went through a mental process similar to the copper mine example. Locomotives, diesel or steam, weigh about 200 tons. They are rugged, hard-working, heavy-duty pieces of machinery. There are many Cyclopean blocks in Egypt and Peru that weigh as much as a locomotive. A monstrous crane was brought in to fish the locomotive out of the river. Imagine placing a locomotive on bare earth or sand. What would happen? It would immediately sink into the ground. There is a good reason that train tracks are built on a gravel bed that has railroad ties laid down crosswise beneath the steel tracks. Could several thousand men pull a locomotive across the sand? That is extremely doubtful. Some kind of hard-packed road would have to be constructed to take the weight and lessen the tremendous drag. As we saw above, our modern highways hold up only under loads less than 40 tons. The average 18-wheel tractor trailer hauls about 20 tons. So it is obvious that loads exceeding 20 tons are indeed very heavy. Those kinds of loads were hauled all over Egypt. Where is the evidence that the necessary roads were installed? They would not have disappeared, as they would have been made out of stones and brick masonry. Assuming a few of the ancient stone block transport roads have been uncovered, they are perfect to test the orthodox sledge hauling theory. The problem of how the ancients moved the heaviest loads is quite enough to crush the orthodox building theories and timelines into dust. In my estimation, Academics are not known for being mechanically inclined, nor are they the ones doing the sweat labor during excavations out in the field. It is extraordinarily easy to put pen to paper and make a 100-ton block of stone move from the quarry into a temple wall. It is impossible to meet that challenge in the real world using manpower unaided by modern equipment. The fact is that the Egyptologist Mark Lenner discovered this years ago when he put together an expert team to try and raise a 35-ton obelisk using ancient tools and techniques. It was filmed by Nova. A master stonemason was brought in to quarry the granite block from the bedrock. Unfortunately, he gave up after trying every trick he knew. They called a bulldozer in, which cut it away from the bedrock and lifted it onto a waiting truck. That was really the end of the experiment, and it proved that it was not possible to quarry and lift a block 1/10 the size of the heaviest obelisk still standing in Egypt. What more proof is needed? Lenner never again tried to use the ancient tools to prove how the pyramids were constructed. In a later experiment aimed at showing that a 20-foot tall scale model of the Great Pyramid could be constructed, he brought in barefoot locals with modern chisels, hammers, and a truck with a steel winch to hoist the blocks out of the quarry. That compromised the entire test, which was silly anyway, as the blocks were less than half the size of the average one used to build the pyramid. How could that prove that 70-ton blocks were hoisted up 150 vertical feet to the king's chamber? His use of the 20-foot tall scale model is analogous to the comparison between the plastic Tonka truck and a real earth mover cited earlier in this article. The whole fiasco proved only that he had become intimidated by the magnitude of the construction problems. We encounter very similar intractable problems when we examine the precision engineering that went into building the Great Pyramid. We have another example of just how precise and demanding this massive project was in a demonstration that took place in the late 1970s. At that point in time, Japan was the global economic miracle and riding high. A Japanese team funded by Nissan set out to prove they had the wherewithal to build a 60-foot scale model of the Great Pyramid using traditional tools and methods. The Egyptian government approved the project. Their first embarrassment came at the quarry where they discovered they could not cut the stones from the bedrock. They called in jackhammers. The next embarrassing situation came when they tried to ferry the blocks across the river on a primitive barge. They could not control it and had to call for a modern one. Then they ran into more grief on the opposite bank when they discovered that the sledges sank into the sand and they could not budge them. They called for a bulldozer and a truck. The coup de grace was delivered when they tried to assemble the pyramid and found they could not position the stones with any accuracy and had to request the aid of helicopters. National pride and saving face are very important to the Japanese, and this was a shameful episode. They were utterly humiliated. All of a sudden, I couldn't form the word. When they ultimately discovered that they were not able to bring the four walls together into an apex, and their mini pyramid experiment was a disaster. They left Giza sadder and wiser. Imagine the inconceivably exact planning that went into building the Great Pyramid in order to bring the 481-foot-high walls to a point. How long did it take the ancient Egyptians to build it? That is the wrong question. The right one is, could the ancient Egyptians have built the Great Pyramid? The answer is, not with the tools and technologies that Egyptologists claim they used. These issues have been raised and debated for decades. It is time to bring them to a head and move on. Alternative historians have pointed to the enigmas and orthodoxy has poo-pooed them. Quite frankly, this gridlock is unproductive. Orthodox historians have shown a disdain for applying the rules and guidelines of scientific methodology to the matter. Chris Dunn has addressed this issue and pointed out that Egyptologists apply a double standard when it comes to evaluating their soft evidence versus the hard facts as outlined above. They set the bar about 1 foot off the ground for themselves and about 8 feet high for alternative historians. The repeated live TV and canned video programs that have been churned out quite regularly since the mid 1990s by Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner have been aimed at shoring up the party line. In the Fox TV special broadcast live from the Giza Plateau in September 2002, I watched the robot explore the shaft. While most observers were focused on analyzing the payoff, the most important parts of the program slipped by virtually unnoticed. These were the filler, segments that recited and added new support for the traditional version of history. It was very deftly layered into the program. In fact, it was the programming part of the show. There really is no debate between the Orthodox and the alternative history camps because the former groups refuse to engage in any fair, open exchange or to provide solid proof of its theories. Every one of their basic construction tenets can be subjected to scientifically controlled tests. Alternative historians have been under the false impression that the other side could be convinced with the compelling fact-based arguments and incontrovertible evidence, but that has proved to be a false assumption. History's mysteries have long since been a political football. In my opinion, it is time to leave behind that paradigm and time to stop playing by the other side's rigged rules. The debate is over, if it ever existed. So why go on wasting effort trying to open closed minds? That is an exercise in futility. Some very crucial issues need our full attention. What intelligent culture built the pyramid complexes using Cyclopean stones? How did they do it, and where is the evidence of the technology that was used? Are we the beneficiaries of an alien yet human DNA that has to solve this riddle before it can evolve any further? Or are we the inheritors of a strictly Earth-based legacy handed down by a lost civilization? The end. That's the end of that article, which is good because I was starting to fall apart there and couldn't form my words anymore. I swear I went to college to learn gooder English, but sometimes I still can't speak. Um, yeah, so that takes us up to Article 30, an engineer in Egypt. I'm not going to get into that tonight. I can feel my voice is not happy, which is why I do limit the length of these reading streams and why I'm going to do more reading streams instead of longer ones. So, yeah, that will be all for tonight for the reading. I'm going to go ahead and end this stream. We're coming up on an hour anyway, which means I'm a half hour late starting my Tomb Raider stream. So I will take a quick break, get my adult beverage ready, and then I will come back for a separate stream playing Rise of the Tomb Raider. So I will see you in about 10-ish minutes, maybe 15.